Hello, good morning and good evening. Welcome to the series of USC online event to learn knowledge from different academic fields. This is Bianca from USC. It's wonderful to see all of you today here. So let me spotlight our topic and speakers. Today is a session about the Master of Arts in Teaching, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages program. And I will call it MAT-TESOL program later. And the topic is Credential versus Non-Credential by Carla Damali, Doris Madrigal, Deborah, and Crystal Conley. They are all from USC Rossier School of Education. And Carla Damali is the Associate Director of the Office of Admission and Scholarships. And Doris Madrigal is the Director of MAT and MAT-TESOL programs. Deborah is Director of Field Work, and Crystal Conley is the Academic Advisor of MAT and MAT-TESOL programs. So if you're interested in applying to TESOL program, please watch today's seminar carefully. And dear audience, please know that we will have about 15 minutes Q&A part after the speech. Feel free to type your questions at any time into the chat box. We will try to get as many questions as we can at the end of the speech. Kindly remind, please mute yourself during the presentation for a good event quality. Thank you. So welcome, Carla.
Hi there, and hi, Bianca. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you virtually. My name, as Bianca said, is Carla Darmali. I serve as the Associate Director here in the Office of Admissions and Scholarships at USC Rossier. So if you have any questions during your application process into the MAT-TESOL program, I will be your point of contact. And at the end of the presentation, I will have my email address. So I certainly would be happy to correspond over email after the presentation if you have more one-on-one conversations in which you want to hold. I am joined by my two colleagues actually here at USC Rossier. So I will have them introduce themselves and then we will dive into the presentation. Dr. Madrigal.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are and joining us. As my wonderful colleagues have mentioned, my role on the team, I'm Doris Madrigal, and my role is basically to be the director of not just our MAT-TESOL program, which you all will learn about today, but also our MAT program. So basically any of our programs that have to do with teacher preparation is what I have the honor and pleasure of working with you on. And I get to work with wonderful colleagues who will introduce themselves. I will just make a note, Crystal Conley is having some trouble joining us this evening. She, if you're admitted to the MAT-TESOL program, she is our academic advisor. So she would be the one who would be helping you once you were admitted, figure out, get your classes, know everything that you needed to do. We work so closely with Carla that Carla takes such good care of you that then, she kind of hands you over to us and the team. And so just so you know, even though Crystal might not be able to make it, so you see her on camera, you would get to know her very well because she would be your academic advisor. But we do have my absolutely wonderful colleague. I kind of call her my little dynamic duo partner because we work very closely on a day-to-day basis, Deborah.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Deborah Solorzano Madrid. I am the Director of Fieldwork. So it's my responsibility to oversee all of your fieldwork experience, making sure that we are in compliance with the agencies with whom we have our accreditation, and making sure that you are all meeting the standards for fieldwork. So that is my role and responsibility. And Doris is absolutely correct. With the two of us working very closely together, we want to ensure that you have a wonderful experience and time in the program. So welcome everyone, and I will pass it back to Carla.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your introduction. So before we really dive into the purpose of this webinar, which is the credential versus non-credentialing track within the MAT-TESOL program here at USC Rossier, I quickly wanted to go over an agenda for this next hour. So we just did introductions. I'm then going to highlight the USC Rossier mission. So if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to read our mission statement, do not worry, I will highlight it here in this presentation. We'll talk about the different credentialing tracks that we offer here at USC Rossier. We'll specifically dive into the California Teaching Credential, how to apply, and then finally, a brief overview of the timeline if interested in the credentialing track. But as promised, here on this slide, you will see a short piece of our mission statement here at USC Rossier. And I would encourage you all, if you haven't had the opportunity to do so already, to read our mission statement, as it really is the driving force behind the work in which we're doing here at USC Rossier, whether that be your fieldwork placement, the faculty and staff in which you interact with, or the curriculum which is implemented within the program. But for the purpose of today's presentation, our mission is to prepare leaders to achieve educational equity through practice, research, and policy. So what that really means within the MAT-TESOL program is that every student, regardless of zip code or where they're from around the world, deserves a quality education. So if that is something that aligns with your professional goals, USC Rossier could be a fantastic place to pursue your graduate studies. And again, I would encourage you all to read the mission statement in its entirety if you haven't had the opportunity to do so already. So now I'm going to pass it over to the programs office, so Doris and Deborah, and they are going to really dive into the credential versus non-credentialing track here at USC Rossier, as I know it is a very popular question. So thank you again for taking your time to learn about it, and I will pass it on to my colleagues.
Great, thank you, Kala. So we've kind of broken it on down to give you an overview of the credential track. We know we get a lot of interest and a lot of questions. And so we're really just going to kind of look over the big picture of what it is so you understand the differences between coming into the MAT-TESOL MA program and walking away with your degree versus also pursuing the credential track. So right now, in the next couple of slides, what I'm going to focus on is what exactly is the track and what is the California World Languages Credential, which is the actual item that you work towards on this track. So in the next slide, what we have is the MAT-TESOL Credential track is an additional pathway to the MAT-TESOL program. So if you've kind of looked into the program, you might have already seen the different courses that make up the program of study and the courses you would take for this program. So the credential track is sort of an add-on to the existing program, right? We give you such a strong base in the MAT-TESOL program for teaching speakers of other languages. That's a really strong base. And on top of that, the faculty designed additional courses, to Deborah's point and her critical role, experiences that you have to have in working in actual classes in classrooms in California in public schools. So you get a kind of in the field experience of seeing master teachers. There's a lot of testing requirements, documentation requirements. So those are all sort of things that go with this optional pathway. It's not required. It's something you would have to opt into and has its own application process if you wanted to do it. And everything that I'm going to talk about in terms of what makes up the credential track is based on the state of California's state requirements for teacher licensure. So it's a very specific program track that's designed so that we can meet the California state standards for teachers in this state. So on the next slide, there's a bit more of detail of exactly what this looks like. If you've seen the courses that we offer for MAT-TESOL, they're very strong. You've seen kind of what they are. If you opt into the credential track, it means 2 additional classes on top of the degree program of study. So you would have more classes on top of that. I'm not going to read the titles of the classes, but you'll see the word clinical practice, and that's because these additional classes tie directly to you being out in the field in another class, in another teacher's classroom, a teacher that has the credential that you're going to earn, that is teaching the language and students that you're going to be able to teach if you get the credential. So the additional classes you take for the credential are very much tied to enhancing your experience in the field, which is a state requirement to make sure you have hours in the field. And we get a lot of questions about these classes in terms of how many total units. You'll see that each of them are 2 units, and that makes a total of 4 units to whatever information you've received about the degree program. And we get a lot of questions like, oh, so I can do them right away. And we can't, because the credential track, you need the bulk of the program and the courses as your base. The courses can only be taken after you get a little further into your actual degree courses. So what that means is once you're entering your third program, your third semester of the program, that's when you would start taking these classes in consecutive order. So on the next slide, you can see sort of what that means for your timeline. So as you see, if you plan to join us for the fall 2023 cohort, you see there each semester, each little square is one of the semesters and what classes you're scheduled to take. If you decide to apply into the credential track, then you begin to take your additional classes, one in your last fall semester and one in the spring. So what that means is because you have these additional requirements and classes, you actually end up having to stay one semester longer to complete your program. When you say, I really want to do this credential program, it gets added to your MA, so you get both at the same time. So I know sometimes I get the question is like, oh, well, can I get the MA when I'm done with my classes in the fall and then my credential when I'm done with my last credential class in the spring? And it doesn't work that way. The minute you say you want the credential, we tie that to your MA and you get both when you complete your credential class. And that does mean you're here one semester longer, but it aligns really nicely with the university graduation and commencement. So that gives you a sense of the timeline of when you start taking the additional courses. So it doesn't seem like a lot, you know, it's 2 additional courses, a total of 4 units. So it's not that bad, but we do want to say that even though it's not a lot of classes, because it's a state credential, and that's what we're working towards, there's a lot of other requirements that come with that. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about, and just so you understand the state. So on the next slide, I just want to kind of focus on this whole track was designed to give an opportunity for those who want to earn a California-based teacher credential. And that's, you're going to see California a lot because in the United States, every state in the country has its own way of saying that a teacher is qualified to become a teacher and to teach in their public schools. So the credential track here is very much that. The end goal is for you to be able to obtain a California teaching credential. So everything that we ask of you to do and everything you experience during the credential track meets the state's commission standards for teachers. So that's how the faculty design the program. That's how Deborah and her team work to make sure they put you with the right teacher in the right school to support you on this track, because there's a lot of things we have to make sure that we support you in doing so that the state says, you know what, this person is ready to be a teacher in the state of California. The last bullets on the slide you'll see is the actual title of the credential. I know this seems really kind of strange, but especially if you're interested in the California credential, we think it's really important that you start understanding sort of the language that goes with state credentialing, because there's a lot of kind of specific requirements for them. So then the title of the credential is a single subject credential in world languages. That doesn't mean that your credential means you can teach all the world languages. It goes with a specific language specialization. So you would have a single subject credential in world languages for Spanish, if Spanish was the target language that you want to become a teacher to teach. It could also be Mandarin, Korean. So there's different language options, and you would have to identify a target language for your credential. And we would ask you that early on if you're kind of interested in that. I know we get a lot of questions about sort of what language options there are, so please do feel free to ask us that. And to note about this specific California credential is that it's typically used by schools to hire people in the higher grades. So in the US, we have elementary school, middle school, and high school. And so typically the positions that will, the schools that require teachers to teach world languages in one of these languages tends to be typically in high school and sometimes middle school, depending on the school. So that's just an important thing to note, because I know sometimes we get a lot of students, even our current students, saying like, oh, but I really want to teach in elementary school. And I'm not saying that there's no way that happens, but in California public schools with this credential, it's really geared towards teaching the slightly older students, because that's where focused language instructions happen. So I think that's just really important for you to know. So on the next slide gives you just a sense of, where do people use this California credential? So again, it's a California credential. So this credential is absolutely required if you want to teach in a California public school. There is no way to obtain a teaching position in a California public school, that's K through 12, if you don't have a California teaching credential. So that's important, because if that's your goal, is you want to live in California and you want to teach in a public school, then you need a credential. Obviously, across the nation, institutions, we have a lot of private schools, and California private schools may or may not require a credential. It really depends on the sort of institution and organization. I know we've seen a trend, for example, with religious Catholic schools starting to require the California teaching credential. Not all schools do. So that is something, to consider is, we'll talk about it a little more, but like, really, where are you hoping to teach? And that'll help you figure out if this makes sense for you or not. Within the United States of America, every state, just like California, has our own set of standards of what and requirements that deem a teacher able to teach in the state. Every state in the United States has that. So just because you have a California teaching credential doesn't mean you can show up to New York and say, okay, great, I got my credential in California, let me go teach in New York. New York will say, that's great, we're glad you have a credential somewhere else, but as New York, we have our own standards to meet the New York standards. So that's always important to note, because while our students, when they do have a California credential, can go to another state, and because they already have a credential, they have an easier time processing a new credential in that state. It's not a one-for-one. So it's not like if you get a credential here in California, you can teach in any other state without having to do additional work. And then nationally and internationally, we have a lot of educational agencies, whether they be governmental, nonprofit, whatever they require for you to be a teacher or work with them, it varies greatly. So that is just something that's always important for us to note, is if you have a California teaching credential, where are you really able to teach? And you can absolutely kind of be creative, but in terms of where it's required, it's absolutely required for California public schools, and it could benefit you potentially in other types of jobs, but it's really a California private public school that is going to say you have to have this credential. So as we move on to the next slides, it's like, okay, we know it's an optional track. We know that there's additional steps to take. We know what you get out of the additional track is getting a California state credential, where you could teach with that, different types of schools and who may require it or not. But then what does it actually mean, right? What is required for you to actually be successful on the MAT-TESOL credential track? So that's what I'm going to review in the next slides. So what you'll see, if you can click again, Kala. So what you see on this slide are all the requirements that you'll have to do on the MAT-TESOL credential track. The ones that are on sort of the yellow bubble are the ones that you need to complete as you apply with us to get into the teaching track. And that's because there's a lot of requirements the state sets. And so to set you up for success, we know there's some things that the state says you absolutely have to do before Deborah's team puts you in a school to work with a teacher and children to learn from them. So everything in yellow is what I'll go over in detail in the next slides. But I thought it was important for you to see that everything that's in the green, kind of associated with the green bubble, are still additional requirements that you also have to do if you get into the credential track, even as you're taking the classes. So I always think it's a good visual to know, because anytime we say, okay, there's a lot of requirements, just to be able to see them and know that you will still be doing your MAT-TESOL degree courses, and all of this is on top of that. So this is sort of the additional things that we would want to make sure you know about and can set you up to be successful on. So you'll see that there's 3 that are highlighted here, and I'll talk a little more about them on the next slide. The certificate of clearance, the basic skills, and the subject matter requirements are things that we will ask for upfront when you apply to get onto the MAT-TESOL credential track. And those are the 3 that I think Deborah would agree are the most time consuming and challenging for students that even currently that really want to get onto the program and that take a little more work. So I want to talk about those on the next slide.
Before we head to the next slide, I just want to make sure that I highlight that when you apply to the MAT-TESOL program, you are not saying whether or not you're on the credential or the non-credentialing track. You're applying to the program, not worrying about these different requirements, but they come in once you say you want to come to USC, we can connect you with Doris's team, or once you're here, Doris can kind of go through the timeline, but I want to make sure there's a difference between your application into the MAT-TESOL program and there's an application for the credentialing track, which will come later. So essentially everyone who's admitted into the MAT program is on the non-credentialing track. And then if you want to pursue the credential, there's additional steps. So I just want to make sure that when you see application due March 1st, 2024, what's happening, but that's for the credentialing track. But the first step is to be admitted into the MAT-TESOL program. So I just wanted to make sure that that differentiation is clear there.
Correct. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for that, Kella. I know as I was even putting these together, I was like, let me try to stay away from criteria and application requirements, because like I said, this is an optional pathway. You don't get immediately admitted into this. You are going to continue to work with Kala to make sure that if you want to be part of our degree program, that's what you apply to. And part of our goal in putting this on is that so you could better understand some of the highlights of this additional pathway. And as you'll see here, because there are quite a bit of requirements, even as you get admitted to us, we just kind of wanted to front load that, because every year we're trying to work more and more with our new admits to make sure that if this is something you want to do, we can give you as much heads up and time to make sure that you can prepare and do that. So I'll go through these really quickly. I don't want to read all of them because they're there for you all. But as Kella said, those who are eligible to apply to get onto the credential track already have to be an admitted and enrolled MAT-TESOL program student. So all of you who are considering joining us, if you follow through and apply and you get in, then you would get a lot more information from us and you would be eligible for this once you're kind of registered in your classes. Students also need to be in good program and academic standing. So what that means for us is not just that you're earning good grades and meeting the GPA requirements for the university and for the program, but also that as we've been working with you from the minute that you get admitted and you've been working with Kala, and then you come in and start working with our team, that we know that you are having the disposition to be a teacher, right? So our interactions are positive. We're helping you through everything. You're being proactive in your communication. So these are things we really keep in mind, because to become a California licensed teacher and a licensed teacher in any other state in this country, you're held to different standards. So we want to make sure that we know that you can be successful. So we try to support you in your application. The next 2 bullets, the basic skills and subject matter, are 2 of the big state requirements that we have. I had them bolded in the prior slide. And there's a lot of ways to fulfill these requirements. Again, a lot of detail because it's a California license, it's a state license. So there's a whole lot of detail that we can provide if you're interested, and we will start providing that, but we didn't want to kind of inundate you with it here. But just so you know, for both these options, basically basic skills is a state of California requirement to say that every teacher in California has the basic skill set in reading, writing, arithmetic. And so there's different ways to fulfill that, and we have all that information we can always provide you. One of the most popular options that we see our students take is a standardized exam option called the CBET. It's the most popular that we've seen with our students. So there's a testing option. Our students tend to do really well with that one. The other requirement, subject matter, is basically the state saying that they need to know that as a teacher, you would have the content and the knowledge about the subject that you were getting your credential in. So in this case, it would be your language of choice for the World Languages Credential. And again, there's a standardized exam option for that. And it's multiple tests depending on which language you choose. And there's other ways to fulfill that. The tuberculosis screening is also something that we need to make sure, and Deborah's team works really closely with you on that, because to be able to visit California schools and to sit in with children, you need to make sure that you're negative TB because it's highly contagious. The clinical fieldwork experience agreement is a really important form that you'll be receiving from the admissions team and then Deborah and her team once you get admitted. And it basically outlines all your responsibilities that you agree to when you're going to be out in the field working with teachers and students. And the one that you see bolded here is the next one, is the one that we see the most students have take the longest to do and have challenges, and we just kind of want to put up there up front and be transparent. And it's obtaining a certificate of clearance. That is basically a state background check where they need to make sure that you're clear and safe to work with children, school-aged children. And in order to apply for that certificate of clearance from the state, you absolutely need to have a United States Social Security number. There's no way to obtain a certificate of clearance. There's no way for the state of California to do a background check with you and check your fingerprints and everything they have to do if you do not have a Social Security number in the United States. So we get that question a lot, so we can kind of address it a little more in the Q&A, but that's why that's bolded, because we do know that that can be a challenge. And then as Kella said, the application to get into the credential track, you'll get once you're a student in the program. It's a very simple application form. And then we just need to make sure, because we do hold you to high standards for obtaining the credential track, that we also make sure that we hold everyone to the deadlines for the internal program application for this track. So on the next slide, just a visual of what that timeline looks like, to reinforce Kella's point. As you look at those months there, like that doesn't really align with the MAT-TESOL application, timeline that Kella shared, because that's the important one you have to deal with right now. The ones you calendar are all the dates Kella gives you. This is just a snapshot of once you're in the program, what's the timeline we follow from the minute that we know you're a student. We start following up with all of this information in a lot more detail than I'm giving now, so that you have everything you need, so that you're fulfilling the requirements. If you really want to get onto the credential track, we're giving you as much time as possible before March 2024. That's usually when we require application for all those first requirements. Then we take time to review that, not just with the faculty and the staff, but we look at all the applications, let students know who are going to get admitted into the track, that they're admitted. And then, as I said, since you don't start taking your classes for the credential until your last semester of degree courses, then that's sort of the timeline that you see. It's a very lengthy timeline, especially since we're starting now to give you information, but it's because we want to make sure that you have as much time as possible to think about, explore, talk to Kella, and really consider whether this credential track is something that, really piques your interest, so that we could be as supportive as possible in helping you meet the goal of applying if you're interested. So just a few takeaways in supporting our current students on the track, those that have graduated with their credential, those that are wondering right now, our current cohort, whether they're going to follow with the credential. I see these three sort of areas of inquiry come up, and they're really helpful. So I wanted to share them with you now, so that you can start thinking about that. If you're wondering, like, why would I do, or if this sounds really great, have a credential, looks really great on my resume, some things to consider. Ultimately, where do you want to teach? And again, we see teachers who are lifelong career teachers, and they've taught in various places, not all public schools, not all private schools. So it is an important question to consider for you to reflect on, is, really what are your goals as a teacher? What are different places that you want to be able to teach? Because I think that one will be very helpful when it comes to this California credential option. Another question is, how will having this California teaching credential specifically help you with your professional goals, right? Most of the time what we hear is like, I really want to try to stay in California. and teach in public schools long term. So even if I don't get jobs in public schools right away, I know it's something I want to do. Great, then absolutely, this is a track for you. So just really reflecting on why would a California specific credential be helpful? And as you're thinking about and exploring schools and thinking about your career goals, even having conversations with types of organizations or schools that you've been really interested in, be like, oh, I would really love to be a teacher here. Have that be a point of, inquiry of like, what kind of credentials or what kind of things really help teachers be successful here. So that's another question that we like ask students. And the last one is really, will you feel able and willing to fulfill all of the additional state requirements? If you remember that visual, there's quite a bit of them. We try to provide as much information and guidance as we can for you, but we're not the ones that can fulfill those requirements. Those requirements do take additional planning, time, money, processing. So because it's such a important investment, we just want to make sure that anyone who considers this track really thinks about their plan to be able to fulfill all those requirements. So those are, questions that I'll leave you with, so you can definitely think about it as you walk away, as you relook at this recording, and certainly questions that Kala can help you with, and we would always be willing to have conversations with if they would be helpful.
Perfect. Thank you, Doris. Bianca, if you want to intro the Q&A, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions anyone has from Zoom or the live stream.
Sure. Thank you very much for the detailed information. And there are many viewers asking questions on the live streaming platform. So let me go to the first one. A student from the live streaming asked that, does TESOL take classes in the city center campus or University Park campus?
Yeah, that's a good question. So all of our MAT-TESOL classes are at the University Park campus. So that is the main USC campus. The question may have stemmed because classes used to be downtown at City Center, but now they are all on the main campus of USC.
Thank you. And the second questions, an audience named Sam. He asked, does Canada acknowledge this credential? And does the is the tuition fee same for the credential and the for the credential major and the non-credential major? Thank you.
I can talk about the fee, and then I'll let Deborah or Doris talk about Canada. So the fee to apply to the MAT-TESOL program is the same for everyone. It's a $90 non-refundable application fee. So that is the same. And then I will let my colleagues answer the second half of that question.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. So similar to what Doris was explaining about the California credential, our credential is only for our state. But can you take our credential and ask if you can have it applied to a different state? Absolutely. There's a process for that called reciprocity, and they will actually analyze and determine what requirements you've met for their state. The same thing will happen with countries. So for example, if you are interested in having your credential used in Canada, what will happen is Canada will take a look at your credential and they will compare it to their own requirements. And they'll look at all the California requirements and they'll say, oh, okay, you did this. We also do that. Check. You did this. We also do that. Check. Oh, you didn't do this. You're going to have to do this with us now. So what they'll do is they'll very closely scrutinize both what the credential requirements are for their country and what requirements you've already met. And they'll determine what it is you're still missing, and you'll have to fill those requirements. And what typically happens in those situations is when you're going to apply, the country, I just did one of these for New Zealand. The country will ask for specific information about what you completed in our program, and we fill out like a paper, or it could be that the country has their own document, or it could be a free written letter. It just depends. And again, you get that information from us. We send it over to each individual country to help you with the process. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and I remember there's a question in there, and I've seen a few on the chat in terms of the cost for the cost. And so that's certainly something that we can kind of look at because we haven't by item, because everyone will be different depending on what language and what options they use to fulfill state requirements. But so that you have a sense in terms of the courses, for any course you sign up with at USC, the credential courses are still USC courses, so they're going to be at the same tuition rate as the rest of your courses for that semester. So whatever the tuition rate is for a unit, it's your credential courses would be total 4 units, 2 units each. They're going to be the same rate. So they're not differently priced in terms of your courses at USC. Now, in terms of the additional state requirements, I'll give you an example. For if you decide to fulfill subject matter to prove that you have all the content knowledge you need to teach the target language that you decided to teach, say you choose Spanish. For Spanish, and you want to do the CSET, which is just the standardized state exam to fulfill that requirement, and you want to sign up for those tests can range anywhere from under $100 up to just under $300 on the test. And for Spanish, I believe there's 3 tests that are required. There's different subtests. So it's really going to depend on what language you have, what options you're taking. So we don't have like a general, it's going to be this much total for the credential option, because it really depends on your individual path and the decisions you take in terms of how you want to meet the state requirements. But it is good to know that, and we can certainly work with CALA to kind of pull these numbers, but when you apply for, when you get your fingerprints, when you apply to the state to get your certificate of clearance, there are processing fees that you have to pay along the way. So that's why it's something that we like to kind of front load with, because they're all processes, they all take time, and they do take money.
Okay, thank you. I believe the audience has understood this question. So let's move to the Zoom chat box. So Qing asked, how about will it cost extra include training courses and exam fee for the credential track compared with non-credential track?
Perfect.
Yes,
so I think Doris just addressed that one, but I'll move to the next and have Doris or Deborah answer it if we still offer the English language development single subject credential for the TESOL program.
Yes. So for our on-ground cohort, which this webinar would be if you're applying and you're applying to take your TESOL program with us at USC campus, we still have the English language development specialization for the credential track. We always try to be really transparent in our experience with that, in supporting students with that. Currently, we don't have anybody pursuing that particular specialization in our current credential cohort. One, we know it is one of the toughest for the subject matter. So again, our students do really well with doing the CBEST, the standardized testing options for their basic skills and subject matter. That CSET is only offered, Deborah, remind me, it's probably like 2 or 3 times during the year, because it is not a very highly used or popular credential target area. So we had a student who was very interested in that, but the testing date, there was no way to get her tests in by the time she needed to apply, because they aren't phasing it out yet at the state, but it's very, very, the standardized testing is very challenging, and Deborah can speak best to that. But what we've learned is that there's only twice a year. Thank you, Deborah, for the ELD CSETs, which is subject matter which you would need. And it is very challenging to find teachers who hold that credential in the state of California, because despite all the great ideas behind why the credential was made, there aren't a lot of teachers in the state that actually hold, or schools that specifically require that credential specialization.
Can I just add, I think it's also important to note, and for us to be very transparent with everyone. I think as Doris is sharing with you the difficulties and the challenges with pursuing this credential. So yes, for the ELD subject matter, those are the only 2 dates. So that's a challenge. Identifying an appropriate teacher to host you with this credential is another challenge. I think one of the bigger reasons why we don't see many people pursuing this particular credential is because the second largest school district in the country, which is LA Unified School District, does not hire people who hold this credential alone. So in other words, if you had that credential with something else, they would probably hire you. But if you hold just that credential, they're not hiring people for that. So that's also something to take into consideration when you are considering pursuing that. I know in the past, when I'm thinking about how many people we've actually had complete the ELD credential path, it's probably, I can do it on one hand. And so it's not an extremely common route. And for those few that I can count on one hand, I personally advise them to earn a second credential, because it's going to be very difficult to identify jobs with just that credential. So I know it may sound like discouragement, but I want to be realistic. I don't want you to earn this credential and not be able to do much with that. So please think about all of those things. And if it is absolutely something you want to pursue, I would say also earn your English credential with that, because that would actually open up more doors for you.
Perfect. There's a question from Peter, and Deborah, you might be a good person to answer this question. So they have questions about obtaining an SSN, a social security number, and your certificate of clearance. If they can, how do they obtain these in advance? So I don't know if you have any advice or guidance, or Doris, go for it.
The advanced piece is the challenge, and I think that's why, and Deborah can certainly chime in. We get this a lot when our new group of students start, and part of the reason that Cala has been so great in working with us and trying to front load that is that if you're not the COC and everything that's involved with that, if you already have a social security number, is easier to do when you're in California, physically in California. If you're out of California and you kind of want to get these done in advance, it's a much lengthier process. And so Deborah can speak more to details on that. But in terms of obtaining a social security number, if you're not from the United States and you don't already have a social security number, I think what we recommend our students and why we're trying to front load you with it is, if you follow through, you absolutely know you want to come to the MAT-TESOL program, you follow with everything that Cal is telling you do, you apply, you get in. As soon as you get in, connect with our Office of International Scholars, because the best way to get a social security number that we've seen our students do is to get an on-campus job. And so those jobs go pretty quickly. So when our students start looking in, their fall semester, like, oh, I think I want to do the credential track because you've been sending us information, they start looking for jobs on campus or outside of campus, and most of those are already taken by other students who, started asking about them earlier. So if you don't already have a social security number, we would recommend trying to get an on-campus job once you get admitted and can start working with the Office of International Scholars to see, what kind of options are and how you do that if you are not already California based.
Great. Another question was regarding being interested in several foreign languages. So for the purpose of our program, you will need to pick one language to pursue your credential. So I get that question a lot, if you have interests in many languages. And Doris, and
Can I add to that? So here's the real beautiful thing about earning a California teaching credential. Once you have what we call a base credential, that's your initial credential, you can actually add on to it. So you don't have to go through a whole other teacher prep program. Let's say if you earned a teaching credential in Mandarin and you want to add at this point Cantonese. if you are going to add Cantonese, you don't have to go through a whole teacher ed program, be placed in a Cantonese classroom for 2 semesters. You don't have to do all of that. The really nice thing about it is you actually would have to apply through the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing to add that credential. Now, there are other steps you have to take, one of which would be to take, I forget how many unit course on how to teach that, I believe, and then you'd have to take the exams. Actually, I don't even know if you need the course at that point, because you would have had the world language, right, Doris? Yeah, so you would probably need to take the subject matter exams in, let's say, Cantonese, and then you would have to pay a fee. So it's easy to, once you earn one credential, it's easier to add credentials onto that. So I always remind students, because they sometimes want to, even in our other program where we do science and math, sometimes people say, well, I want to earn both credentials, but we don't offer that. And so you have to choose one that you're going to be really strong in, and then you just add the other credential at a later time.
Perfect. I just wanted to reiterate something that I see in the Zoom chat. And then Bianca, of course, I want to open up if there's any questions on the live stream that I'm missing. But if someone is on the credentialing track and then ultimately does not fulfill the requirements, you will just move to the non-credentialing track. I don't want you to think that you're going to be kicked out of the program or you won't receive your degree. Everyone who's enrolled, of course, will receive their MAT-TESOL degree. The difference is whether or not you'll receive that California teaching credential. So if you do decide to pursue the credential and then something changes, you would just communicate that with the academic advisor in which you're working with, along with Deborah. And then, of course, you would then be on the non-credentialing track. I don't want you to think that you'd be taken out of our program because of that. Bianca, are there any questions on the live stream?
Yeah, an audience concerned about the internship, he or she asked that, does this program include an internship, both for the credential or non-credential, and is the internship paid? Thank you.
I'll have Deborah speak on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And at first I want to just define what internship means, because it means different things for different people. So in the state of California, when we talk about internships, that means that you're actually working at a school and you're getting paid to do that while earning your teaching credential. We don't offer that option here. So we don't have internship options. Now, this person who's asking may be referring to something else. That's why I wanted to clarify that. But if you're talking about very specific California internship for teachers, that we don't offer. While students are earning their credential and they're completing their field work, which is student teaching, it is not paid. We don't pay you for that. That is time that students actually have to dedicate to and focus on learning how to be a teacher. So it's not a paid job. We can't, in the state of California, when you are a teacher candidate, you're not a teacher of record. So you can't be earning a salary. You can't be earning money as a teacher when you are a teacher candidate. So we have to make those distinctions. So hopefully I answered the question. And again, if the person had a specific about what they meant by internship, you can go ahead and let Bianca know.
Yeah, I would add to that with what Deborah said is I know sometimes people think about internship and programs like we set you up with while you're in the program, you go to places where you may or may not get paid and you're doing the type of work that you hope to do. To Deborah's point, we do not offer internships in that different set, that non-credential set for the program. But what is really important to note is even though we don't do paid or unpaid internships, if you, aside from the credential, if you were interested in applying the program for our degree program, you would be working closely with Deborah's team because part of your actual degree program is working in the field. And what that means is having experiences, observing teachers, and that's just for the degree. So while none of those experiences are paid, they are requirements that are part of your courses that you'll have to do to get your course grades. And that's why we have Deborah and her wonderful team. So while it's not an internship, also perhaps in the form that you meant, you are getting experience in working with students and other individuals who are teaching English to speakers of other languages. So you get actual field experience as part of the program, but it's certainly not paid.
I want to be conscious of time, and I have like a couple more slides I want to go over, but before I do, just one last question I'll take from the chat, and I'm going to ask Deborah this. Is the credential a lifelong certification, or do we have to renew the certification after a specific time?
That's a great question. So in the state of California, we have a two-tier process. So what happens is while you're in our program, we are supporting you to earn what we call the preliminary teaching credential. So what that means is just that it's preliminary. It's before the big one, and it's not even final ever because you have to renew. But that preliminary teaching credential that you earn with us is good for 5 years. And during those 5 years, you actually have to find a job and work toward the process of clearing the credential, which we refer to as induction. So during those 5 years, you have that time to clear your credential. Once you clear your credential, you are on your on the CTC website, it will say clear single subject credential. It's good for 5 years, and that one is renewable. That preliminary teaching credential that you initially earn with us, it's a non-renewable credential. So if 5 years expire and you haven't earned your clear, that's that, it's done. There are sometimes one lifetime exceptions that you can apply for. They're not extremely common. So I would make sure that, again, if this is something that you want to do, I think Doris has mentioned repeatedly, this is a California credential. They're expecting you to be a teacher in California. They're expecting you to clear your credential, have a job in California. So all of these things kind of have to line up. So the preliminary credential is your first step, 5 years, non-renewable. The next time you'll apply for your clear, and that's good for 5 years, and you renew every 5 years. And the process is really simple. I still have my credential. Every 5 years I go in and I pay a fee, and it's good for 5 more. So it's a pretty simple process.
Perfect. Thank you, Deborah. All right, I'm going to move forward because it's almost 8 p.m. here in LA. So I hope that this Q&A and this presentation have provided clarity of whether or not the credential track is the right track for you, depending on your career goals and what you're hoping to get out of our program. But the first step to becoming a credential or a non-credential student is to apply to the MAT-TESOL program. So you will see on this slide the application checklist. So our application right now is open for our fall 2023 start. So our on-campus MAT-TESOL program has one start date a year, and it's always in the fall. So I won't go through each of these specific items, as that is not the purpose of this particular webinar, but I do want just to note that the application right now, again, is open if you want to join us here in sunny California in the fall. In terms of application deadlines, we are right up to our second round. So our second round deadline is January 15th. So it will be here before you know it. So if you're in the midst of filling out an application for our program, just note again that our round 2 deadline is January 15th. This means all of your application materials need to be here at USC, including your transcripts, your letters of recommendation, along with that application being submitted. If anyone is here for the first time listening about our program, this round 2 deadline might be kind of tight to meet if you're just opening up an application. So the application will remain open, and our round 3 deadline is March 15th. So perhaps a more realistic deadline if you haven't already started an application with us. And you may be wondering, what is the difference between the different rounds? So in terms of admission decision, that remains constant. So whether you apply in round 1 or 3, you have the same chance of admission, but those that apply in the earlier rounds do have internal scholarship priority. So we do have scholarships that we award based off of the holistic review of your application. And those in rounds 1 and round 2 do have priority to those scholarships. So again, if you're in the middle of an application, really try to push to round 2, which is January 15th. And if for anyone that is not a reality, the application will remain open, and our round 3 deadline is March 15th. In terms of next steps, of course, you can feel free to schedule a one-on-one consultation with myself if you want to take this conversation offline. If you want to kind of explain your specific situation, or if you have more pinpointed questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Begin working on your application. For anyone interested in financial aid, you can complete the FAFSA, research private scholarships and apply, and of course, contact our office if you have any questions. On this slide, you will see my email address. So if you have any questions after this webinar, please feel free to send me an email. I'm more than happy to answer those questions. Additionally, if you're interested in a recording of this webinar, send me an email. I'd be more than happy to push the recording your way. So that is it in terms of the formal presentation. I just want to thank my colleagues at USC, Doris and Deborah, along with my colleagues that are overseas, Bianca, Amy, and Terrence, for your ongoing support. This really is a whole team that comes together to make sure you have a great experience here at USC Rossier. Deborah just put in her contact information. So if you have questions about the fieldwork experience, so going into the schools, Deborah will be able to answer those questions as well.
Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Carla, Doris, and Deborah.
Thank you.